Happy Friday, everyone. I'm the last speaker of the conference, which means I get to do the awesome thing and say thank you to all the organizers and volunteers and everyone else who made this awesome event possible. I have very much enjoyed my first time in Australia and this conference for the first time. It's been fantastic. It is also Friday, and as Tenderlove, where are you? I know you're here somewhere. Alluded this morning. There you are. Hi, Aaron. It's Friday, so that means Friday hug. And I know some of you just came in from the other track, but many of us have been sitting for a while, so let's everyone stand up, make the Friday hug arms, and since it is still technically Thursday night in Seattle, where Aaron and I are from, I will tweet this at them, and they will wake up to a lovely Friday hug from Australia. Also, I may send this to my boss to prove that there are a lot of Rubyists in Australia. Thank you all. So, my name's Aja, and I like dinosaurs a lot. One of the coolest things I've done while I was here is we went to some opal museum, and they had an entirely opalized plesiosaur skeleton, and I just went out of my mind with glee. I'm from Seattle. If you haven't figured it out by now by the fact that I talk funny, I am from the States. This is what it looked like at home on Monday. That's snow. It doesn't normally do that. But it's okay, because I came to Australia a bit early, so that's what I got to do on Monday. And I may have rubbed that in a little bit, because, you know, it was lovely on a white sand beach, enjoying the ocean. This is what Seattle normally looks like about this time of year. It's beautiful. Maybe not as beautiful as Melbourne, but still pretty beautiful in my opinion. And as mentioned, I work for Google Cloud Platform as a developer advocate. Someone tweeted at me to ask if I had managed to bring a data center with me, but it didn't fit in the luggage. But we are building a data center in Sydney this year, so there will be a data center coming to Australia. And since my work was gracious enough to pay for me to come here, if you have any questions about Google Cloud, Kubernetes, anything else related to what we do, I'm happy to answer them. You can hit me up on Twitter. You can email me. My email is thagamizer@google.com. The Thagamizer is my Twitter. Tweet at me as much as you want during talks. My phone's not connected to the internet, so it won't interrupt me. And I actually noticed several Google Cloud logos around the conference last 2 days and some people looking at the dashboard, so I know we have customers in this audience, and I was really excited about that. So, on to my actual story, data center fires and other minor disasters. One of my friends likes to say this: if nothing bad happens, you don't have a good story to tell. And I've noticed that when we get groups of folks together, they like to tell stories about the horrible things that have happened to them. One of the Airbnb hosts we had earlier this week was just gleeful, telling us about how wombats like to dig through people's tents and open their coolers up to get at their food. So we needed to be very careful of the wombats when we went to the national park. And I've noticed the same thing happens when you get a bunch of developers or engineers or sysadmins together. They like to tell stories about the day that everything went wrong. Many folks seem to have a big red button story. Who's got a big red button story? Yeah, I've got a couple. My favorites always start, so this one time the CEO was visiting the data center. Some of my other great favorite stories start with things like, so do you know how the fire suppression system at the data center works? Let me tell you. So I'm going to encourage you all to gather around the virtual campfire, and I'm going to tell you about the boneheaded things that I've done and the disasters that I've experienced and how those have changed how I write software and how I build teams. So our very first story starts at midnight, and since it's story time, once upon a time at midnight. I was doing a release for a startup I worked at, and we did our releases at midnight because this was 10 years ago now, and it still was pretty acceptable to take your site offline to do a release if you needed to do database migrations. Most folks don't put up with that now, but you know, technology has gotten better. We've held ourselves to a higher standard. This also happened to the first time that I was the solo on-call, doing the release by myself without a backup in case something went wrong. And that was because my backup was on the Trans-Siberian Railway. Literally. Likely somewhere in the far east of Russia or in Mongolia. So not particularly reachable by me in case things went wrong. So of course that's the night that things went wrong. Our release process was written up by someone who had been in the military, and it was basically a pre-flight checklist. I think there were 37 items on it. It was 2 pages, 1 page front and back that you had to print out, cross off the stuff you didn't need to do, make sure that you cross-checked off the stuff you did. Everything had to be done manually. And I had done it a dozen times before with someone watching just in case things went wrong. But even an efficient run-through of this took over an hour. And so that night, I got the list printed out. I'm sitting at my desk at home and going through things, putting up the maintenance page, notifying the team that the maintenance page was up and that we were officially offline because the CEO wanted to time that kind of thing, getting the new code on the servers, running the database migrations, restarting the server but leaving the maintenance page up so that I could test it before we took the maintenance page down and went live again. The standard, really boring manual release process. So I go to manually test things, and this page that all of us love and hate, I was using a URL hack to bypass the maintenance page, and I get on there, I'm like, oh no, everything's wrong. We got assets missing all over the place, random errors, it isn't even bugs I've seen before, and I was working in tests primarily at that point. And so I started freaking out. And then, find your moment of calm, start thinking through, walk through the steps you've done, and I realized that I had just pushed master and not our release branch. So that would be an easy fix, because, just push the new code on top of it, with the exception of the fact that we had database migrations in master that we had not approved for merge into the release candidate. Master was way far ahead of the release branch at that point. So basically it was midnight, my boss and backup was in Mongolia, and I had just corrupted the production database. Yeah. So, luckily, part of that lovely checklist we had required that I take a full database backup before I was allowed to start anything. So I had the backup sitting around. And also, luckily, this was not strictly true of most folks on the team at that point, I actually knew how to restore the site from the database from backup because I was working in test. So I was restoring anonymized backups on a regular basis for staging environments. So the only problem with that is the first step was I had to drop the production database. And that was one of the most terrifying things I have ever done in my entire life in work. So dropped it, bring it back up, and restoring from a database in MySQL, for those of you who've done it, even a moderately sized database does take a good hunk of time, and I'm sitting there petting the cat. It's gonna be okay, it's gonna be okay. My boss emails me, what's taking so long? I'm like, something went wrong, it's gonna be okay. Bring the site back up, everything's fine, and the only negative result was that we had an outage of 3 times normal, but it was at midnight. So I don't care that much in the grand scheme of things. And this happens to be the only time I have made this particular mistake. But I've seen it happen to so many other people, and I'm sure that there are people in the audience who have done something similar at some point. So what did I learn? Well, the first thing is automate everything. I am very dumb late at night. I am also very dumb when I am stressed out and when I am tired. Therefore, anything that I could actually break something significant should be automated. And automating your push isn't sufficient. You need to automate the rollback as well. So when you realize that you messed up, you just hit the big red rollback button, and everything goes back to how it was. You can deal with it after some sleep and some coffee with a nice, calm demeanor. And the other moral is always have a backup. Backup of everything. Your data, preferably a backup of your on-call so that you're not just a single person dealing with this and you can have an extra set of hands when something goes wrong. So, I promised data center fires and other minor disasters. So, once upon a time, someone sent a message to the on-call pager, and this was long enough ago that it was actually a pager. So, turns out customers were having trouble getting through our checkout process. I started digging into the logs, and we found that we were getting a timeout when we were trying to talk to our credit card processor. Okay, this seems like a pretty simple problem to solve. Go to the credit card processor's website and enter a support ticket. So we went to the credit card processor's website, and this is what we saw. So that wasn't good. We're like, okay, well, next step escalating is get out the old school phone. Give them a call. They have a support number. We called, and we couldn't get through. So we happened to be uniquely situated in that we were in this one building, and there was a car park, and then there was the building that our credit card processor was in. And we were on approximately the same floor of these 2 high-rises. And so we peek through our curtains and try to peek into their network operations center, which we could sort of see. And the only thing we saw was a lot of red. So it turned out that our credit card processor, there had been a data center fire at the co-location facility where our credit card processor was located. And I did a little research for this talk, and that co-lo facility also happened to be where 3 or 4 of the major news stations in Seattle were located. And they all had to evacuate too, and so they were actually, the radio stations were actually, they called in on a cell phone to their own radio station to report on the fire that was happening in their studio. It was pretty interesting. It was a big enough deal that 19 fire vehicles responded. And the power went off, which was good, because there was a fire. The generators kicked in, which was also good, because that brought up the stuff that absolutely had to stay up. And then the fire brigade took the generators offline because they were afraid it was an electrical fire, which was not so good for those of us who were reliant on facilities that were in that co-location center. But the fire went out. They got the fire put out. And this is an actual picture of the fire damage. I actually pulled this from the news website. And there was a little bit of a wrinkle here in that this fire happened over a holiday weekend in the US. It happened on a Friday, and everything was going to be shut down through Monday. And so the fire brigade responded because it doesn't matter if it's a holiday to them, but before anyone could reoccupy the building and before the power could be turned back on, the fire inspector for the city had to come in and say that it was safe. And he apparently does not work, or she, does not work weekends. So the entire facility was down all weekend. Luckily, it did come back up. Credit card processor was fine. They made some better changes so that they weren't reliant on a single co-location center for everything, including their phones and their support processes and stuff as well. And luckily for us, once we figured out what the issue was, it was really easy for us to handle because when we had been building out our site, someone had insisted, someone may have been me, that we had a checkbox in the admin UI that turned off any dependency we had on an external entity. So we had a checkbox that just turned off the store. And when the store was off, people couldn't buy things from us, but everything else on our site continued to work. If you had a subscription, it didn't renew, but we also didn't end your access. If you had a free trial, it didn't convert to a paid account, but it also didn't end your access. As far as everyone was concerned, what they had paid for still continued to work. We just couldn't take new payments, which was great, because we ended up being offline for 3 days, or we ended up not having our store for 3 days. So what I learned from that was that when I design a system now, I make sure that any external dependencies, I have a way of isolating, and I have a way of restricting their impact on me if something goes sideways for them. And I try to make it so it's something that you can activate without having to redeploy. I know a lot of people use like environment variables and stuff for this, but then you have to restart all your web serving processes to pick up the new changes, assuming that your web server caches them like it should in memory. The one downside to doing it in a way that is automatically live, no matter, you don't have to do any sort of redeploy, is that you can accidentally turn on and off these dependencies, which is something that has also happened to me, but good audit logging and good access policies can fix that. So this talk is data center fires, which is plural. So the second fire. The second fire was in a colo that my company was actually using at the time. And the story is that they had warned us a few weeks ahead of time that they were going to do some maintenance on the electrical facilities in the data center. They were going to move everything over to diesel, which was great because they wanted to practice doing that anyway because they believe in practicing for disaster. And then they were going to do some work on the auxiliary power units and the power conditioners in our section of the data center. We're like, okay, they gave us a month-and-a-half warning. So the appointed time came. They sent a mail announcing that they're going to generator power. We watched our servers. We proactively had made sure that we had sufficient battery backups in the rack so that we could deal with up to a 15-minute outage while they switched from power sources. And we kept our eye on things, but there was no issue. Everything just stayed up. And then suddenly we went down really hard. And then the colo sent a mail saying that there had been an incident during maintenance. And all power to our section of the facility had been cut off, including all of our battery power. They said they would try to get our rack back online quickly, but they couldn't make any promises. So one of my coworkers grabbed the go bag, and we're like, someone needs to go down there so we can start bringing stuff back up, because we didn't actually have our system set up so that if we lost power, it would come back up on its own once power was restored. Someone had to go manually sit there and coax things back up. And we talked about who was going to do it. I'm like, I live closer. It's fine. I'll go do it. Then we realized that there was a problem. Only one of my coworkers actually knew the current state of the hardware and what had to come up in what order. And one of us had to be back at the office to verify that everything was actually working. So A few hours later, everything comes back up. Our colo sends us a picture of a very, very fried circuit board and said that the parts of the auxiliary power unit had caught fire while they were being maintained. And that the comment they attached to it was, our vendor has never seen anything like this before, to the degree that the vendor didn't know how to fix it. They ended up actually running on diesel for almost 2 weeks while the vendor assessed the situation, tried to figure out what had gone wrong, and then tried to machine and manufacture the parts that were needed to replace it, and then come up with a replacement procedure that was going to be safe. I feel sorry for them because they had to run on diesel for that long, but we went down there and yep, they were just trucking in diesel, running on diesel to keep everyone online. So what did we learn? First of all, we learned that we needed to make sure that we had a process for restarting everything if everything went sideways. We also needed to make sure that we had our hardware distributed across 2 sets of battery backups. The way we had set up our 2 racks is we had the database stuff in one side, and we had the web servers in the other. And we ended up mixing and matching them so we could lose one rack, and everything would still be up, modulo switching and IP address issues. But the big lesson I took home is that there shouldn't be any silos. Pair on everything, and not just on code. A lot of us know we should pair on code, we try to pair on code, but you should also be pairing on debugging. You should know and learn from everyone else on your team the ways that your system is likely to fail and the things that you should go check when things go wrong. And you should also pair on hardware. The fact that we only had one person who knew what the actual architecture of our rack was, how things were wired together, what was where, and what needed to come up first, was a huge problem. Everyone should be able to help. And if you're hiring people that you can't feel like you can't teach that stuff, hire different people. The other thing is disaster recovery plans don't count if you don't practice them. I'm very, some Google SREs published the Site Reliability Engineering book, and this is one of the points they drive home a lot in that book, is that you need to practice your disaster recovery plan for it to be a real disaster recovery plan. We were down for longer than we should have been, because they actually got our rack powered back up within about 20 minutes. We were down for a couple hours because we just didn't know how to bring stuff back up cleanly. And finally, I just use the cloud now. Well, the mom and pop co-location facility that we were using had one of the coolest Christmas trees I have ever seen. It was covered in like 8 kilobyte RAM sticks from old Macs. I'm sticking to the big guys from now on because stuff like this doesn't happen to them, or if it does, they've figured out ways to do live migration and other things so that it won't affect their customers nearly as easily. Also, you should have stuff in multiple regions, N+1, or multiple zones within regions at least, because this colo facility was divided into multiple zones with separate power, but we had all of our stuff in one, which meant when that section went down, we went down completely. If we had divided it between 2 sections, we would have been a little better off. So this story is not one of mine, but I'm stealing it from my coworkers because they said I could. So once upon a time in Japan, my team had a really cool demo rig called Cloudspin. It was a bunch of phones in a big arc, and they were set up to take pictures simultaneously, and then you stitched them together so you had like a Matrix-style video. Because that's hard to explain, that's what it looks like. I wanted to make sure the animation was playing. So someone's like, hey, can you bring that demo to Japan? It's super cool. They're like, great, we'll bring it to Japan. But importing a bunch of electronics into a foreign country can get a little tricky, and we needed like 30 phones to do this. So they shipped over the hardware that like held the phones, the mounting rig, the lights, that kind of stuff, and they had someone in Japan just buy the right phones, standard commodity hardware. So they show up, they get the rig set up, they're starting to put the phones in, trying to hook stuff together, and they realize that the power and sync cables on these phones were different than the ones in the US with the same name. It's like, it's the same phone, but the actual cabling is different. So, okay, great. We're in Tokyo. It's not like we can't find an electronics store. So they go out shopping, and they're searching for adapters to make the US side of the hardware talk to the Japanese side of the hardware. And after 3 hours, they realize that there just isn't any. They can't find it online. They can't find it in any of the electronics stores. So they're talking like, maybe we should just cancel the whole demo. No one knows that we're planning on doing this. It was just going to be a cool thing we were going to do. But someone had a better idea. They went out and bought 2 soldering irons, and the team stayed up most of the night hand-making connections between the Japanese adapters and the US side of the rig. But they got it done, and it worked. So what I learned from this story when they relayed it to us at the next team meeting was don't make assumptions. Details matter. If something is critical to your success, you need to verify it again. So they were assuming that the connections were the same. What they should have done, or what in hindsight made more sense, was they should have had someone take a picture of the phone or look up the specs for the Japanese phone to make sure it was actually going to work. Also, have someone on your team who knows how to solder. Diverse interests and hobbies are surprisingly common in the tech industry, and they can be very, very useful at surprising times. So my last story before I do the moralizing bit of this talk is telling you that sometimes you're your own worst enemy. So this one time, I was working on a client-server WebSockets application. I'm going to fudge a lot of the details here to protect the guilty, but it's important to know that we needed between 30 and 60 messages a second across the socket to go through each connection. Does anyone have a guess as to why? Ooh, because animation. We were actually sending individual frames of animation across the WebSocket. And 30 frames a second is reasonable for most web-based animation stuff. So one day, we're having our weekly retrospective, and we're drinking a beer and chatting about everything that went wrong that week and how we want to fix it for next week. And the system starts alarming. And then, I should clarify, we were in beta at this time. We actually have a pretty limited user base, but we were trying to pretend that it was production to work out the kinks in all of our monitoring processes and stuff. Well, two of us are like, okay, grab the beers, go back to the computers, and we're like trying to figure out what's going on. Traffic is going crazy, memory is spiking on all the machines, something is clearly not okay. And we couldn't figure it out. So we went, and just restarted everything. We were in beta, it was fine. And things went back to normal, we went back to retrospective, we finished it up, we went home for the weekend, didn't think anything of it. A couple weeks later, I actually went on vacation, and the same thing happened. Except this time, after everything was restarted, it just went down again. And then they restarted everything again, and it went down again. They ended up actually keeping everything offline for about an hour, I believe. It's been a couple years. And then bringing it back up slowly, and everything was stabilized again. So they spent several days debugging the issue. And when I finally came back from vacation, I jumped in, and since I hadn't been there during the incident, I had some fresh eyes. I was able to look at it from a different perspective. And we eventually figured out what was going on. So here's what actually happened. One of our clients sent a malformed socket message to the server. The server then broadcast that message out to all of the clients. The clients choked on that malformed socket message and restarted. And so when they restarted, they automatically tried to reconnect to the server. But the server was still holding open their previous socket because it hadn't gotten the I'm leaving message, and it was waiting for a timeout. And when they reconnected to the server was like, hey, there's this message that got sent right before you should get. And it was the malformed one, which would then corrupt the clients again, and they would then drop off, and then they would reconnect again, but the sockets would be held open. And it turns out modern computers are really good at reconnecting at a very high rate of speed, and everything just cycled way out of control. So, as the title for this section said, it just kept trying and trying and trying again to reconnect and pull down bad data. And we had made the assumption in our server code that our clients, which we were also writing, would never send malformed requests. Yeah, it wasn't such a great assumption. So the end result was basically that we DDoS'd ourselves by trying so hard to keep the connection to the server alive. And I know other people have done the same thing, because when I told this story another time, someone's like, yeah, I totally did that too. And the moral here is that sometimes you're your own worst enemy. So make sure that when you think about the ways that your own code could break, when you're thinking about testing it, most of us think about malicious actors outside the system, or particularly bad load days, or other things. Think about the ways that your own code can shoot you in the foot, and then harden against those kinds of mistakes. As soon as we stopped accepting malformed requests, this issue didn't happen again. The other lesson here is that incremental backoff is a fantastic thing. So this is closing talk. I'm supposed to, it always feels good to talk a little bit about big ideas and feelings. And one of the things I really wanted to get across in this is that we all mess up. I've been working professionally in tech since 2002, and I have made so many mistakes and done so many boneheaded things. And that's just how this job goes. It's how almost every job goes. And we're kind of lucky that for most of us, when we mess up, nothing particularly bad happens. Our company might lose a little bit of money. Okay. But But we still don't like messing up. At least I don't particularly like to. So what saves us? What helps us out when things go wrong? And one of the big things is trust. You need to be able to trust your coworkers. You need to be able to trust your tools. If you can't do those two things, you either need new coworkers, new tools, or you need to fix your trust issue. I can't tell you which one of those it is. But when things go wrong is not the time to be second-guessing what your monitoring system is telling you. It's not time to be second-guessing whether that person you guys hired 3 months ago actually knows what they said they know. You need to know that everyone's working on the problem and that all your tools are going to be there to help you and they're going to be right. Part of my rant here is that if your monitoring system alerts when there's nothing you can do, it's a bad alert, and it's teaching you not to trust your monitoring system, so you shouldn't do that. The other thing we need to do is we need to learn from each other's bad experiences. I am very much trying to do a thing called No Complaining February, where you don't complain about things you can't change. Because there's this feeling that we shouldn't be negative. And while I agree that No Complaining February is a good idea, I do think telling the stories of our failures is how we all collectively get better. I ski. I've learned some great things from some of my friends about places I shouldn't go at the mountains near my house because they've made mistakes there, and there's places that are dangerous that just aren't well known. Likewise, the day that I ended up at the top of a short cliff and had to make some interesting choices to get down, I shared that information with my friends who go in similar places, and they now know not to go there. Also, they have reminded me that there is a rule that I can ski alone, I can ski difficult runs, or I can listen to music, but I can't do all three at the same time. The other big thing about what saves us when stuff goes wrong is communication. You need to be able to communicate clearly. You need to be able to communicate clearly with your team members. You need to be able to communicate clearly with your tools. And I actually have a blog post about one of the things I look for most when hiring people, and it isn't, do they know the stuff? I care more, can they learn the stuff? Because this job is continual learning. But one of the big things I care about is when stuff is going sideways, when we're being yelled at by 4 or 5 different directions, when the alarms are going off, when the red lava lamp is lit up, do I want to work with this person? Will I trust them to communicate in a way that's going to work for me? If it's midnight and everything's going wrong, are we going to actually be able to communicate as a team? Frequently, that isn't the same person that I want to go grab a beer with after work, but that is the person that I want to work with long term. And ownership. This is another thing that saves us. I talked about not having any silos. Group ownership is a fantastic thing, and it's really hard. It's really hard because we like to think that we are our code. And I'm here to tell you right now, you are not your code on so many levels. Everyone in the group needs to own the project. You need to work together, because that means that one person can take vacation and everything's fine. Nothing's going to completely explode. I mentioned the idea of postmortems a little bit, I think, earlier, but if I didn't, many of these things are critical parts of a postmortem. They're things that get discussed. And I've been through a lot of postmortems, and I generally didn't like them until I discovered the idea of a blameless postmortem, because it was always, whose fault was this? This is a direct quote from the Site Reliability Engineering book, and I'm going to read it because I actually really like it a lot. A blamelessly written postmortem assumes that everyone involved in an incident had good intentions and did the right thing with the information they had. Trust. If a culture of finger-pointing and shaming individuals or teams for doing the wrong thing prevails, people will not bring issues to light for fear of punishment. And this is so, so vital when things go wrong. You want to be able to say, yep, these are the things that went wrong. Here are the things that we could have done differently, and it's not anyone's fault, but it is a group effort, because we all own this, to make it so those things don't go wrong in the same way again. And secretly, this is actually a diversity talk. You guys didn't know that. One of the things that makes good teams strong and helps us when stuff goes sideways is having a diversity of skills. Having that person who had been in the military working under really stressful conditions for a long time meant we had that checklist. That was really, really useful when I lost my head, when the database got corrupted. Having a bunch of people with different experiences means that we all look at problems a different way. I had a lot of experience from black box testing that I was able to throw at that DDOS problem, and my coworkers were doing really cool stuff, but I came at it from, over here, and looking at it with a different set of experiences and a different perspective enabled us to find things better. So I want to say thank you for having me. Here's my contact info. I like dinosaurs. I'm Thagamizer on GitHub. I'm the Thagamizer on Twitter. There's an underscore in there. And I blog at thagomizer.com, and I'm trying to write every week this year. Thus far, I've been doing it. Again, I work at Google Cloud. I have a giant pile of stickers and tiny plastic dinosaurs and Google Cloud stickers, and you should come get them for me so I don't have to take them back to Seattle. I do have a couple minutes for questions. And because it's the end of the conference and everyone doesn't actually want to sit in this room any longer, I'm going to bribe you. If you ask a question, you get a cat picture. And someone's going to ask the obvious question, and I highly encourage it. Yes? Can you show us a cat picture? Yes. Any other questions?
Is that a picture of your cat?
This is, yes.
Yes.
That is a picture, so the question was, is that a picture of your cat? The first picture was a foster kitten. Kittens come into the Humane Society, you take them into your house for a couple weeks, you get them healthy and socialize them, you give them back. It's kitten Netflix, it is fantastic. But this picture is actually my cat. That's one of my cats, that's Emma. There's another foster kitten. I have an entire computer full of foster kitten pictures, because if you had kittens coming regularly through your friend's house, you would totally take pictures too. Any other questions? Yes?
I think we probably all generally assume that Google has long since engineered out these issues. Is that true?
So the question was, Google has long since engineered out these issues. We have a fantastic SRE culture. I really like the SRE folks I know. But one of the things I really like about Google Cloud Platform, one of the reasons I'm willing to be an advocate, is that when we mess up, we say so. And we publish our postmortems for any of our intermediate to major incidents publicly. We tell you what things we're fixing. If there's bugs in any of the open software, and a lot of the stuff that is part of cloud is actually done completely in the open, TensorFlow, Kubernetes, all of the client libraries, especially the Ruby ones, but all of them, we make the bugs visible. And so random things happen. Well, I've only been at Google about 2.5 years, but one of the things that happened while I was early on there was one of the data centers got hit by lightning. 3 times. The first 2 strikes didn't cause a problem, but the third strike did cause a minor blip. But we wrote a postmortem about it. We actually wrote a postmortem relatively recently, not about a technical issue, but about a process issue, because someone's account got suspended, and they were very public about the fact that it was frustrating to them. And we wrote a postmortem about what happened, and then we showed the 12 things we were going to change in our system to make it better so it wouldn't happen again. That's another picture of my cat, Emma. Any other questions? I got one more cat. Yes? No. So the question was testing the backup part of my checklist? And the answer was no. It probably should have been. But there's the last cat picture. So thank you all again. This has been a fantastic conference, and I'm really excited that I got to be here. Wow, I am done.